Hi, welcome back to the channel. I'm Michelle, and today is my mid-year homeschool update for group subjects. If you haven't watched any of my previous videos, my first video was the mid-school year update for my first grader. The second video was my fourth grader, and this will be group subjects. So I'm going to get straight into it because we have a lot to cover. So most of our group subjects, or the things we do together, comes from Torchlight Level 3 Innovation Inquiry. So to start off, we're going to talk about the read-alouds we've done. So the read-alouds we've done so far are Freedom Over Me, and this tied really well into our history. Torchlight ties a lot of their reading into different elements you're using within the curriculum. So Freedom Over Me is the author took some papers she found from a plantation, and this tied in when we were talking about slavery in America, early slavery and colonization. And she took these papers, and on the plantation papers was a list of assets. And of course, on that asset list was people, because slaves were considered property at that time. And she took the information, the only information on that piece of paper was if it was a child, an adult, male, female. So that was the only information. So the author took that information and created stories for these individual people, kind of a retelling of, there was a cook and each of them had a job on the plantation, and it was really nice to give almost like a living book aspect of it, that you could see how these were people and how they had lives and how they struggled. So that was a good one. We also recently are doing Peter and the Starcatchers. That's kind of like a prequel to Peter Pan. My kids have really liked that. We've gotten into Pirates in the Caribbean. We did Mary Anning's Curiosities, and this was okay. I mean, my oldest in public school, when she was in second grade in public school, covered Mary Anning, so this was not a lot of new information for her, but for my 6-year-old, she enjoyed it because she didn't know a lot about Mary Anning during that time. And one of the things we did with Torchlight is, one of the activities is we made fossils, because Mary Anning is the mother of fossils. She found them as a child and continued to work through it. So we took candle wax and a sponge, and we talked about the different ways fossils are formed, especially with bones and the spongy material, and they got to kind of break it apart and try to excavate. So that was one of the fun Torchlight activities. One of the read-alouds we did that wasn't a big hit for either me or the children was Wild Robot. I know that one's really popular in the homeschooling community, but my kids really didn't like it, and I didn't think it was that great either, personally. I can see where the author was going, talking about, sentient beings, artificial intelligence, and Torchlight does awesome with their literature discussion, bringing out those themes and those deeper level of thinking. But the story itself, I think, missed the point, and I think it's funny that I often see people on here talking about having sensitive learners and everything. The Wild Robot gets kind of violent. I mean, it starts with pretty much a robot massacre, and those are the words used in the book. And you're trying to give life to this robot and human characteristics, yet this robot's walking in a field full of other robot parts. So it was just very weird for me, and then there was just really violent parts where like a bear tries to rip off the legs, and it was just, I don't know, I think it missed the mark for us personally. I think there's better ways of addressing things like sentient beings, consciousness, what makes us who we are, things like that. And I think I might come from a kind of biased perspective because I grew up watching Star Trek Next Generation, and one of the characters on the show was an android, and most of his storyline was exploring his humanity. And what I actually ended up doing while we were reading that book is show my kids a couple episodes from that where he had to defend that he was a sentient being, and then there was another episode where these robots actually become alive and reproduce, and there's a trial to determine whether or not they should be allowed to be sentient creatures. So I think there are other ways of addressing it, but for us, Wild Robot was just a miss. Next, I'm going to talk about history. So of course, we are continuing with Curiosity Chronicles. We finished Early Modern History, Volume 1. So this was pretty much starts from early colonization, and we're getting into the First World War, and this went really well. I'm just going to go over really quick some things, highlights that we did. I really enjoyed the games. Now, we did buy the student guide and teacher guide that goes with Curiosity Chronicles activity guide. And with that comes really fun activities. So when we were talking about the early colonization and Columbian exchange, there's a game where you get recipes and you get dealt a certain number of cards, like wheat, tomatoes. So tomatoes came from America, wheat came from Europe, etc. And you're trying to make as many recipes as you can by the end of the game, and that was a lot of fun for the kids. I really do enjoy, because Curiosity Chronicles is from a secular point of view, it addresses religion, I think, in a very respectful way, because I don't think you cannot talk about religion when you're talking about history, because they're very much intertwined. Many, spread of Christianity, different religions affects the world. Wars, literally, all these things affected. So when I think you come from a biased perspective that's saying this religion is better or this was right for doing that, I think it clouds history. So I really appreciate Curiosity Chronicle coming from a non-biased secular point of view, offering the insight to how different religions and religious movements affected the world and history. So I really do appreciate that. I really do like the culture corners. In every chapter there's a specific culture corner or activity or something you learn about. So we learned about ballet, we learned about salsa dancing, we learned about the importance of hair in different cultures, how it not only can define your ethnicity, but also things like how hair is important to certain tribes and why it's a part of their culture. Some of the things we did was a kingship debates when we were talking about absolute monarchists. So we got to have an open, discussed debate about one person had to take the side of an absolute monarch is the best type of monarchy, and the other person had to debate it. That was just really fun, especially to see my kids get riled up and so passionate about it. So that was good. We also did Newton's law, so we talked about gravity, so we did a kind of demonstration with that with balloons, and we got to move them in different ways and talk about how gravity was being shown in that experiment. We got to the Salem witch trials, and it was interesting learning about that because we played a mass hysteria game, which we all got to pick a piece of paper out of a bowl, and if your paper had a dot on it, you were a witch, but you had to convince everybody you weren't witch. And how we ended up playing the game was nobody had a dot, but everybody was accusing everyone of being a witch, so kind of given insight to how mass hysteria, how large groups of people create paranoia and things like that, and how it unfortunately led to a lot of innocent people being killed. One of the other games we played with Curiosity Chronicles that was in the student guide was a strategy battle. So we were talking about different battles and borders, and one of the game was you got a certain number of tokens, and then you got a certain number of armies, and you had to place your tokens where you were going to, and then with each roll of the dice, you got an opportunity to invade another country. And if you invaded a country, you had to roll a dice, and if you had more armies, you got to roll the dice that had more numbers on it. If you had a small army, you had to roll a 1, 2, 3 dice. So obviously, if you don't have as many army or protection in your country, you're more likely to be taken over. So that was a lot of fun, and it was funny to see again my girls get riled up about that. Of course, they took out Mom first. They both teamed up and took out my countries first, and then they went at each other, which was pretty funny. So I have to say this is a great curriculum. I highly recommend it. Is it a lot of information? Yes, but this is something we will most likely cycle through, get through all 4 years, and continue to go through it again. So it's just an introduction, exposure, and learning and building upon the knowledge we already know. So that was history. Again, really fun for everybody. Some of the things, we kept going was I talked about these books in my last update. Toys, amazing stories behind great inventions. This is fun. We've talked about Legos, Raggedy Ann dolls, Slinky, everything. So it was just a really fun, because most of the toys created were accidents or meant for something else. And again, that goes with the innovation and inquiry part of Torchlight. Fantastic Failures, True Stories of People Who Changed the World by Failing First. Again, this is a great book for growth mindset. Most recently, we did Christopher Reeve and what happened to him and how he didn't let it stop him. So we kept going with those. Next was in Torchlight is this book of innovations I talked about in the last update, how we did like plays and things like that. This time we did a Newton's Law of Gravity. We did an experiment that where they had to make a device that would, a science rig that would show how gravity works but with limited human error. So you can't push objects, so you had to create a device that would push objects. 6-year-old was awesome at this. She went straight to magnet tiles, got her device ready, and it was really cool to see her kind of shine in that moment. The other thing we did was assemblage art, and I have a whole video on that. I'll link up above. But they got to experiment with making different kinds of art, so that was fun. Of course, during December we did our Advent study, and again I have a video detailing what we did for that Advent study, but we did St. Lucia. We pick a specific culture or tradition to study every Advent, so December season, and learn more about it. That way, hopefully when my kids are adult and grown, they will have little snippets from all these different cultures. So we did St. Lucia Day. We made the candle crown. And again, all the details for that and the resources are listed on that YouTube video. And then we made St. Lucia dolls, or peg dolls. They turned out so cute. This is Starboy. This is the one I did. And then my girls, my 10 and 6-year-old did St. Lucia dolls. So this is my 6-year-old, this is my 10-year-old. And then even my husband got into it, and he actually drilled holes and got all fancy with his, but this is his St. Lucia. And then of course my 3-year-old participated as well, and as you can see we just used snowman peg dolls because I thought it would be easier to make the candles, because the candles are actually toothpicks, but he just painted his to be included. So those are what we did for St. Lucia Day. We also made saffron buns, saffron is not a readily available spice and it's more expensive, and I have to say my kids and I did not really actually like the saffron buns. My daughter liked the raisins in that aspect, but it is a very floral biscuit type thing, and it's just a different flavor than we were used to. But we baked it and did all that, and we tried it, and no one was really a fan, but it was interesting to get a taste of a different culture. On top of our St. Lucia study, we did a Advent study as well. If you're new here, I am a Christian, specifically ELCA denomination, and I detailed, what our Advent study entailed in that video. But it went really well. I think dedicating Friday specifically to Advent study and that St. Lucia study and not having any other work really worked well. We really got to dive deep. Nobody felt rushed. So I think I will try to continue that schedule next year, where we do regular school work Monday through Thursday, and then for the 4 weeks of December, that Friday we'll concentrate on our Advent study and our whatever religious or holiday tradition we are studying. But we talked about different psalms. That was the point of our Advent study. And we talked about civic leaders and the responsibility of taking care of our neighbor, and that power isn't God-given, and that everybody must answer to God and take care of those in need. And it was just a really good Advent study, talking about the journey of, Jesus being born, of the anticipation of that, but also the hope of the future. So I really, really enjoyed the Advent study, and something we will continue to do every year. Next is Shakespeare. So we continued Shakespeare. We read Macbeth, Romeo and Juliet, Twelfth Night, and Merchant of Venice. My 6-year-old's favorite is still Midsummer's Night's Dream, but she's very into mythical, magical things, so that makes sense. My 10-year-old very much loves Romeo and Juliet right now. She loves the passion and the teenage angst that goes with it, so she really enjoyed that. So we continued to read through the books, and again, Torchlight tells you when to read it. We continued to do that with this, and that was a good resource. I really like how it sums up the story as well. What I did add to this, though, is I added a YouTube version of the plays, just because there's so many characters in Shakespeare plays, and there's usually, issues with hidden identities or mistaken identities, so it can be easy to confuse the characters. So I would always add, after we read the story, some type of YouTube video or Shakespearean interpretation for it, so they'd get a better idea of what the story was about. So they really enjoyed that. We did continue to use How to Teach Your Child Shakespeare. The only difference is we stopped memorizing the passages. It got to the point where, especially during November and December, we were just really busy, and I'm not a big fan of just blatant memorization. I do think it helps a lot understand the language of Shakespeare, but after the first couple plays, I think my kids had a good handle on the language of Shakespeare and the rhythm. So memorizing seemed kind of pointless at that point. So we continued to read the chapters that described specifically what those lines meant or what was going on at that time in Shakespeare's life that would have been relevant. So I do still utilize the book, but we do not memorize the passages anymore. So now we're going to talk about subjects that aren't related to Torchlight, but we still do as a group. So the first one would be science. Now we do core knowledge science. We finished our human body unit study. We did that in the summer and to fall. And everything from body systems to puberty and reproduction went really well, really good information. But we did not last year finish third grade, the last unit, weather and climate, because core knowledge does it by grade. So we went back to the last unit for third grade, weather and climate, and we've been having a lot of fun with it. The kids got to make weather vanes, which is funny because we actually got to use them in a blizzard. So that was a lot of fun. We've talked about air pressure, and we got to do the experiment with heat and a pinwheel to see how the heat creates the air and it makes it go faster. So that was a lot of fun. Science has been going great. And again, core knowledge, it's a great program, completely free online. Next would be art. So we did scale back art in November and December just because it's such a busy season. We did continue to use the Harcourt art book once a week. We kept with that because, again, this is the grade 1 version. These are done by grade level. But we did keep doing this every week, and I think it went really well. I have one of the examples here. So we talked about seascapes. So this was my 10-year-old daughter's. And I really think it captures that preteen, like a lot's going on in the center of the storm. So I really like that. Some of the other things we talked about is mobiles. We made mobiles. We talked about form and shape, symmetry. They did paint and butterflies on both sides. We did the seascapes. We did varieties and textures. They made hats and necklaces. So it was just a lot of fun, short things. And again, I think that's the nice thing about art is that it doesn't have to be crazy intensive. It can be quick. And we did this a couple times, but again, that November and December, we eased off it just because we got super busy. And one thing we do during summer is we do a more intensive art, music, the areas we tend to lack during the normal school year. So I know we will get more into art as we go, but I think this is completely fine. This is more than enough for now, and it's something we're all enjoy doing, and that's the point. We'll do it if it's simple. The other thing we've been doing is our co-op. So our co-op meets once a week, depending on weather. Sometimes it does get bad that we don't meet. But the schedule we followed for most of fall and winter was we had a poetry tea time, we had 2 nature studies, and a photography. And again, I taught the photography, and I have video up on co-op resources I use, but this was the main thing I did. Each kid had a camera. We had everyone ranging from, my daughter is 6 to 14, so we had a pretty wide age range, so there was kids that knew more than others. But again, I picked out simple things like just how to take a good picture, how to zoom, how to focus on your subject. So basic photography rules to follow, and everyone, I think, did a really good job. They would end each class by going out and taking a picture of the specific thing we talked about, and we discussed how that picture reflected what we learned about, so that went well. Poetry tea time went really well, of course, that's always fun. Some of the things we do in November and December is we have special meetup things. So for November, we had a Thanksgiving, and we tend to focus on Native American culture. So we had a speaker come out, someone that is part of our church and is also part of the Native American community. and he brought out his big drum and talked about the importance of the drum to Native Americans. He brought out all of the clothes that he wears, the ceremonial clothes he wears, and that was just a fun experience. And because we have so many food allergies and autoimmune conditions in our co-op, we tried to find something the kids can make together that is safe for everyone. So this year we did candy apples, and that was a lot of fun. They got really messy and sticky, but it was a lot of fun to do that. And for December we made gingerbread houses, which I have a video on here about how I made our gingerbread house, because again, we are a gluten-free family because of celiac disease. But it was just a lot of fun to get everyone together, played some holiday music, had a cocoa bar, and made some gingerbread houses. And it was just really nice, and I think a lot of people think co-ops aren't necessary, but I do think there is a benefit to having that community, not only for our children to, interact and have friends, but as adults to have other adults to lean on or talk about the struggles or suggestions that we may have. And we have a very eclectic group of people. We come from different, denominations, different religions, different age group kids, but we do have commonalities and we can still benefit from each other's knowledge, and that's great getting together. So I know it can be hard to find a co-op that works or you fit into, and that's one of the reasons we created the co-op we have now, is because we were the ones that didn't fit into all these other little groups. So it's been going really well. There are, of course, struggles when it comes to any co-op with scheduling. Unfortunately, one of the parents had to step away because they moved, so luckily another parent stepped up to help me run it, and we planned out the remainder of the, 2023, because it's a new year, the rest of the school year, and we have some exciting things planned. We're going to be doing some science experiments. We always keep poetry tea time because I think that's fun. We also do nature study, and that's one of the nice things about co-op is it can cover areas that I'm not covering in my homeschool. I don't do nature study in my homeschool. I'm not an outdoorsy person. So the fact that we can have that covered in co-op is great. Same with poetry tea time. We don't go into very much depth in our homeschool with poetry, but that is a good place for it to be. Same with science experiments, and later in the year we're going to be doing a career study and veterinarian. So co-op is a great thing to kind of stick in those other areas you don't have time for necessarily in your homeschool schedule. So that's been really good. The last would be, I guess, updates. So the biggest one, I think I talked about the struggle previously, is my youngest child. So he was 2 then, he's 3 now. He's just really destructive, and he was dropping his nap, but sometimes still needing a nap. So that's kind of leveled out. He does still nap for probably an hour and a half, but it's much later in the day. But it hasn't really affected our schedule much. The only difference is, during group, I noticed he is more interested in participating. Is he ready for any type of schoolwork? Absolutely not. But I think it's cool to sit at the table and do what his sister's doing. Does it always last long? No. But for example, when my oldest is doing math, he'll like to sit next to her with a little workbook that we give him that my oldest already used, and he'll write in it. And when my oldest needs help, he'll come and get me and tell me that she needs help so I can come. So he's like the messenger, and he really enjoys that part. When I'm working with my youngest, I'll be working with certain numbers, or we'll be doing addition, and I'll say 5, and I'll see him on the little side next to me, and he'll say the number 5, pretend to write it. So it's really cute that he's getting less, destructive and more interactive with us. And we do our group work while he naps. Now, our core work, he usually settles down enough to get through math and the beginning of language arts. And frankly, if he gets too crazy, he will usually have a tablet or TV. He gets 30 minutes of screen time every day, so usually we'll utilize that time, and he'll watch his show for 30 minutes while we're getting through math or language arts or something like that. Something I did pick up for him that he got for Christmas is this preschool busy board book, which I think he'll really like, because again, he likes doing little things next to us and and he likes to feel like he's participating. He really enjoys read aloud and things like that. So we will use this, and what's nice is one side is the Velcro stickies, so he just has to match it, and then the other side is the dry erase tracing thing, so he can get this out and just have fun and feel like it's something just for him, because I think that's what he wants. He wants to be included, but have things that aren't just his sisters. So that has worked out. I'm glad that that's leveled out. And if you're in that season where the kids are crazy and really destructive. No, it will pass and it will get easier. And of course, I'm sure he'll get into another crazy phase. But for right now, it's going well. So that's nice. And then other than that, I think, our schedule, our rhythm, everything has just worked out really well. And I think a lot of that has to do with just understanding my teaching style, what I'm capable of, what my kids are, and creating that family rhythm. I know a lot of people talk about that, the homeschool group, and there are things that completely disrupt that. I think because our first year of homeschooling was so difficult. If you didn't know, the first year homeschooling, 3 months into our homeschool year, my mother died unexpectedly, and it kind of just blew up our homeschool year. So I think anything compared to that would seem pretty easy to us, and that's what this year has seemed really free-flowing. Really, everything's going well. We've made very minimal changes, if any changes, to any of the stuff we have done. Everyone seems to have a pretty good attitude going into things. And I know that's not always the case. I don't want to paint you a picture of rainbows and unicorns here, because it's not. There are definitely struggles. There are days that I get attitude and, lip and talking back, and those things exist. There are still days where there are tears, but for the most part, we're really enjoying this time together, especially during December. Having that specific Advent time during December really made the season more magical, getting to do the things that we really wanted to do as a family, but still, pursuing our academic careers as it may be. So I would say overall, it has been a very good update. I hope the next one I can say the same thing about that. But we're halfway through the year, and I'm pretty excited. It seems weird we're halfway through the year, but we are making really good progress. Everybody's learning and growing, and that's the most important thing. So if you have any questions, leave them down below. If not, thank you for watching.